Welcome back, everybody, to another reaction video. Well, I've had a bunch of requests for me to do a reaction to this video called History of the United States, I guess. One of the most popular videos I've ever done a reaction to on this channel was the History of the Entire World, I guess, by Bill Wirtz, and I guess this is inspired by that. I haven't seen it yet. I did see pop up on my feed that my friend Mr. Terry did a reaction to it recently. So I'm kind of following on his coattails a little bit here, but thought I'd check it out because a bunch of you have been commenting and asking me to do that. So let's go ahead and dive into this. I'll put a link in the description to the original content if you want to check him out. I think he's got something like 12,000 subscribers, so it's a fairly new channel, or it's a fairly small channel. I don't know how old it is, but check him out for sure. So let's go ahead and dive into the history of the United States, I guess.
The United States is a country on Earth with 50 states. It's powerful and it's
American.
It's pretty cold and human beings are trying to spread all over the planet. They reached the edge and they got sticks and babies. Hey guys, check out this bridge. It goes to the other side of the world. And there's a lot of food.
So one of the things that growing up in the U.S. that you all learn about, everyone learns about in school growing up, is the Bering Strait and how 25,000 years ago all these folks came across that eventually became the Native Americans or indigenous peoples that we know today. So they're really not indigenous peoples because nobody's indigenous to North America. Everybody came from somewhere else. So it's just a matter of when they came. But so interesting. He starts with that, just like we all start with that as kind of the beginning of the history that we learn about.
Oh,
it's called the Bering Strait, by the way, because the guy's name was Bering, the guy who kind of first explored that area. And today it's, of course, separated by water, but it's super close. People don't realize how close the United States and Russia are to each other at their closest point. In fact, there you go. The Bering Strait, right there, the closest point between the United States and Russia is 2.4 miles, 3.8 kilometers. These two islands right here, one belongs to Russia, one belongs to the United States. Of course, remember, Alaska until 1867 was part of Russia. Russia sells it to the United States in 1867. It's known as Seward's Folly because William Seward, who's the Secretary of State, is kind of the one who oversees that purchase. And at the time, everybody thought it was nuts. It was just a big ice box. But of course, then they found precious natural resources there, which changed everything.
Well, you're all stuck now. Okay, so people are...
He missed an opportunity there to do a 5,000 years later, you know, like something from SpongeBob.
Chilling out on the land, gathering food, and hunting mammoths. Well, they died, but they got a backup. Hey, now that we got food and land, let's form a society.
And bison, it's interesting because most people call them buffalo, but they're really not buffalo. Buffalo are extinct, and they were much, much larger than what we call the American bison today. The American buffalo. They're distinct animals.
Oh, someone just discovered gambling, but more importantly, someone just discovered farming. Wait, we could have just planted stuff in the ground? Yeah, and soon everybody learned about this, planting corn in the process. Hey, now that we got farming, let's form a better society.
So Adena, that's kind of cool because growing up here in Ohio and learning about the Native Americans, the indigenous peoples to Ohio, the Adena and the Hopewell are the ones that we typically learn the most about. They were the mound builders, and there's a lot of those mounds that you can still see in southern Ohio to this day.
Then they make some hills, then they die, but they still make those hills, making a city around one. Meanwhile, the Mayans become so obsessed with the then they collapse. Some natives in the West liked the desert, building their town under some rocks. North America was getting pretty diverse,
That's kind of cool seeing that map there. Let's go back to that.
Building their town under some rocks. North America was getting pretty diverse.
And this is really oversimplified because there's so many more tribes and people groups than just this. You have kind of multiples just within the Iroquois. And all of this area, the Shawnee, definitely lived in Ohio. They don't show that here on this map, but like we have Shawnee State University in southern Ohio. The Shawnee were a big part of that. The Cherokee down here, of course, Mississippi. You've got Choctaw and Chickasaw and all of these groups. There's so many more. The Sioux, there's the Lakota, there's the Cheyenne. I'm not sure why we're only showing these ones here.
Diverse, pretty complicated, and pretty beautiful. Sort of. The Aztec and the Inca empires are getting started. Wait, hold up. Check out this boat. Knock knock. It's Columbus. From Europe. Yo, what's up, my Indians? Where my spices at? Columbus politely asked as disease killed the entire population. Hey.
And the name Indians gets used because Columbus thinks he's landed in the West Indies. Or I guess the East Indies is what he thinks. He thinks he's gone across. Everybody knew that the world was round, okay? Get rid of that myth that maybe you grew up with, that everybody thought the world was flat, and Columbus was that innovator that suspected it was round. Everybody knew it was round. The issue was how far, or how big is it, and how far do you have to go west to get east? And Columbus thought that distance was shorter than it really was. And he ends up running into an entire continent that he didn't know was there.
Spain, I found India.
India?
And so Europe began legally assaulting the Americas. Sorry guys, give it a second. Wait, this isn't even India. But dang, check out these resources. Hey Portugal, I'll take all of this and you take this tiny chunk because I'm better than you. In the meantime, let's use the...
It's called the line of demarcation, and it was agreed with the Pope on where that would be. And so everything to the west of that line became Spanish. Everything to the east of that line was given to Portugal. And that's why you have Brazil speaking Portuguese, whereas the rest of South America, for the most part, speaks Spanish.
The natives to do the work for us, but the natives died, remember? So plan B. Check out the new Columbus Triangle thing, now in business.
The triangle trade's another one of those things we learn a lot about in school growing up, and it involves slaves, it involves spices, it involves all these different things going on. Let's talk a little bit more about that, though. So specifically what you're dealing with here is this kind of circular or triangular system that's going on where you have raw goods, things like sugar, cotton, tobacco, but also things like trees for wood. Because remember, Europe, especially, for example, when you think of the British who control British North America, there's limited space for growing things like lumber, and so there's just trees everywhere. There's all of this just kind of raw materials that are available here. You ship those to Europe where they're manufactured. They're turned into finished goods. You then trade those manufactured goods with Africa, where you pick up slaves, mostly getting them from other Africans who have enslaved them in the first place, and then sell them to Europeans who ship them to places like North America, to the Caribbean islands. These sugar plantations, for example, down in the Caribbean were not possible. They couldn't be profitable without the use of slave labor. So that then is able to produce the sugar that you turn into things like rum, for example, which you then sell to Africa. So it's kind of this big racket that's going on.
I want a bigger slice of that wealth cake, suckers. The British are off to set up a colony. Second try, by the way. And they did it. Look at that.
Second try, because, that most people learn growing up about the two mostly successful colonies, Jamestown in 1607 and Plymouth up in Massachusetts in 1620. But yeah, Roanoke is in the 1500s. Sir Walter Raleigh's involved in that. And, we've done a whole video on what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke, as it's known, because nobody really knows 100% for sure what happened to it. But the first successful colony, the one that sticks, is Jamestown. At least for the English. Now remember, St. Augustine, Florida is much, much older than any of those.
Tobacco. Britain kind of sucked religiously. Ew, said the pilgrims sailing away for Jesus. Dude, let's make some
sailing away for Jesus. So Henry VIII breaks away from the church in Rome, the Catholic Church under the Pope. He doesn't really break away from the Catholic Church. Henry considered himself to be a faithful Catholic. He would not have considered himself to be Protestant. In fact, he opposed people like Martin Luther. Henry VIII wrote some pretty nasty back and forth letters, responses with Martin Luther. They said some pretty terrible things to each other, which is kind of interesting when you think about Martin Luther as this religious figure using this really vulgar language toward people like Henry VIII, because Henry VIII was defending the Catholic Church. In fact, the Pope names Henry Defender of the Faith at one point. So he wasn't breaking away from the Catholic Church. He was breaking away from the Pope's authority, specifically because he wanted to be able to get divorced. So eventually they do establish the Church of England, which the sovereign of England, Henry VIII in this case, then later his children, are the head of the English Church. But it does eventually become Protestant. But then they require everyone to be a member of the Church of England. Well, then you have other breakaways from them, folks like the Pilgrims, or otherwise known as the Puritans, who didn't want to have to be a part of the Church of England. And so then they couldn't get the freedom that they wanted in England, so they come to America.
Colonies, with more colonies in the middle. I can't eat pork, but bacon just made slavery popular. England still sucks. Hey guys, check out my new crib. You can do whatever you want. Check out those immigrants. Let's talk about the South. Here slavery was a big hit. What did Britain do about this? Nothing. Sweet, we're free. Because we gotta stay Christian. Europe was getting intellectual. The colonists heard about it and started reading stuff like John Locke, Adam Smith, Toad.
So I visited Adam Smith's grave in Edinburgh, Scotland, last week. So that was kind of cool to see him pop up in there. Yeah, the Enlightenment has a big influence on the eventual breakaway of the American colonies. And then later on you'll have writers like Thomas Paine. So writing is very influential this time. Great thinkers who are putting thoughts out there, putting ideas out there that many people listen to and subscribe to, and then will turn around and those very same people who have been influenced by these great thinkers are going to be the ones who are going to become the influencers to move the American colonies towards independence. And so, you know, I've always hated the term influencer to use for people like on Instagram or YouTube and things like that. But if we're going to use that term, let's understand there have always been influencers. And at this time in history, in the 18th century, the influencers are the writers, these great thinkers who are putting these new ideas out there.
Understanding liberty and democracy. Check this one out. Britain and France are killing each other. Britain wins, and they're broke. Damn, we need some cash.
And, you know, it was much more complicated and going on for a lot longer than that. And I've been learning a lot about, for example, you have the Jacobite rebellions that are happening, where even though Scotland is part of Britain, it's Great Britain at this time, which Great Britain is this entire island. It's Wales, England, Scotland. They aren't the United Kingdom yet, which is going to include Ireland at first and then eventually just Northern Ireland. But Scotland and England are very much at odds for 60 or so years over who should be the king of Great Britain. Scotland definitely leans more heavily toward the Catholic Jacobite line, which is King James II, and then his son, Bonnie Prince Charlie, they call him, or King James VII of Scotland, second in England. And of course, France has always been supporting Scotland in her wars against England. So, and the Spanish did too. So England's been at odds with France and Spain for a while now, and that's just going to continue with the French and Indian War in North America. We know it as the 7 Years' War, and then later on with the American Revolution.
Hey, can we go west? No. Also give us money. So Britain starts taxing the hell out of the colonies.
He makes a great point there. People don't talk a lot about this. We talk all about taxation without representation, and that seems to be the only thing we focus on when it comes to the revolution. But the inability to go west was a big part of this too. The British had this agreement with the tribes that were to the west of the Appalachian Mountains that they weren't going to expand in that direction. And the colonists, the people who live here, wanted to be able to expand in that direction. And they claimed all of that land as being theirs. And so that becomes a big motivating factor for the revolution. And the first thing they do after the revolution is expand west.
Something just happened in Boston, and Revere told everybody, let's dump some tea in the ocean because they taxed it. Hey Britain, can you stop ignoring us? Britain didn't really care, they just kept doing it. Okay, we gotta talk about this, people. So Britain's clapping us right now, but I think we can still make peace with them. Look, another shooting. And Revere told everybody. That's not happening, said Thomas Paine, writing a book about independence.
So when he said Revere told everybody about the Boston Massacre, Revere was a silversmith, and he had made this engraving, this image of the Boston Massacre. In fact, let me pull it up. So here it is. This is the engraving by Paul Revere. That shows a very inaccurate version of what happened in what became known as the Boston Massacre, which was anything but. It was a mob that was egging on British troops. At this point, you've got a city of 15,000 people with about a quarter of that British soldiers. Actually, I guess there's probably 15,000 inhabitants plus 4,000 British soldiers. So, yeah, about a fifth of the people in the town at that time are British soldiers, and tensions are high. It's only a matter of time before something happens, and this mob gathers out on the street around the State House in Boston, and they're throwing ice balls at these guys. They're throwing rocks. They've got weapons in their hands. They're egging on these soldiers, and at some point, shots ring out. 5 people are killed, and it becomes spun as the Boston Massacre. And Paul Revere's engraving of this event, which is completely false in how it depicts it, gets ingrained in people's minds as how things happen. And some people have called this one of the most effective pieces of propaganda in American history, the Boston Massacre. And it becomes one of those galvanizing events that lead people toward independence.
Now people hated Britain, and they declared independence. You guys suck. Psst, you want to team up against Britain? And they destroy Cornwallis, and they win.
Get out of here, Britain!
Now we're in control. Bro, we need a government. They create a constitution, but a bunch of farmers made it fail. Okay.
A lot more complicated than that. I wouldn't say Shays' Rebellion causes the Articles of Confederation to fail. There were so many more factors than that. And I did a whole series on that. So I'll throw some of these links in the description if you want to check out some of these other videos about some of these topics.
Okay, we gotta talk about this, people. We need to remaster our government. The states had some ideas. Let's just do both and create the Congress and stuff. Some people like this, but some people didn't like it. So they had 10 rules to make sure they like it.
Yeah, absolutely true. And here you have the early signs of what will become a two-party system in the United States. Because right off the bat, you have people who are for a strong federal government and people who are opposed to that, which the people who are opposed to the strong federal government were probably happier under the Articles of Confederation in the first place, because the Articles of Confederation were a very weak central government where the states kind of had a lot of autonomy. And so, yeah, the Bill of Rights, which James Madison is kind of one of the primary forces behind, were meant to soften the blow of the stronger federal government that was being thrust on the former colonies. Yeah.
We need a leader! So they invent the president, and everyone made it this guy because he was such a legend during the war. Nice bank, Hamilton. Wait, how strict should the Constitution be? Yes. No. Goodbye, Washington. Wait, he's got some...
Wait. Let's go back for a second. I want to see
Hamilton.
Who said...
Wait, how strict should the Constitution be? Yeah.
Not entirely sure where he's going with that, but I don't know. I feel like those should be opposite, but maybe I'm just misinterpreting what he means by that, because Thomas Jefferson was the one who was all about a weaker federal government, and Alexander Hamilton was all about making it as strong as possible. But these two really are the polar opposites in Washington's administration. You've got the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of State. And they could not have been more opposed, and they just did not like each other at all. But Hamilton is kind of Washington's right-hand man. Washington trusts him pretty much with everything. A lot of people have argued that Alexander Hamilton was a de facto prime minister in Washington's administration, where Washington was kind of the figurehead, the head of state, and that he kind of left the running of the government to Hamilton. And Hamilton just expands the treasury like crazy. there's these descriptions of, at this point, there's only a few cabinet departments. You've got the Attorney General, the Secretary of War, the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury. And Hamilton's department at Treasury was by far the biggest. I mean, he had just, I think, a couple hundred times as many employees as the War Department did, for example. And so this is going to become now the basis for the two-party system, is going to be how they focus around the ideas of these two men right here, the Federalists under Hamilton's influence, and the Anti-Federalists, which will become the Democratic Republicans, with Jefferson and Madison's influence.
Yes. No. Goodbye, Washington. Wait, he's got something to say. Don't make political parties. Worst mistake of my life. Okay, said America, creating them anyway. Hey, can we not follow the law? Whoa, France is going cray-cray right now. Probably because we did that. Napoleon wants to remake an empire with this huge chunk of land he's got. He failed. Might as well sell it. Hey, do you want my land? Okay. Some people saw Jefferson as a hypocrite after this.
Which makes total sense, because Jefferson had been all about a weak federal government and not growing that government's power and influence, and then he turns around and does some of the most powerful things ever by the executive. But the Louisiana Purchase makes sense, and I think it was absolutely the right decision, but it does seem to fly in the face of everything that Jefferson said he believed. I did it! I ended slavery! Said Eli Whitney, inventing something that just increased it.
What is Britain doing? Dude, they're stealing our seamen! Never mind, it's land. Let's go.
So, impressment is one of the factors that is typically given in the start of the War of 1812, which goes from 1812 to basically the fighting ends at the end of 1814, a little bit into 1815. The biggest battle for the Americans, the most successful battle, the Battle of New Orleans, in which Andrew Jackson wins this great victory over the British, happens after the war's technically over. They just haven't heard about it yet. The Treaty of Ghent, I think, is the treaty that ends that war. And it's basically a stalemate. But yeah, impressment. The British are stopping American ships and saying, the Americans have British sailors on board, British citizens that shouldn't be with the Americans, and we're going to claim them back. And they would take these American sailors off of these ships and put them to work on their ships. And that becomes one of the factors that leads to the war.
Nice, new reform movements. Now slavery is becoming controversial. Yo, they're using machines now? What the heck? And it made the North more complicated. Everyone's moving to cities. And slavery's still bad, but it's balanced perfectly. Hey guys, I want to become a state, specifically a slave state. Yes sir, preach! Maine. Screw you, we're adding Maine to the gang.
At that point, Maine had been a part of Massachusetts, and yeah, I've talked about this many, many times before. The entire existence of the United States from the time of independence in 1776 up through the 1860s with the American Civil War is all about this idea of balance between North and South, and slave states and free, and the expansion of slavery, and all these sorts of things. So much of politics, even down to how states get added to the Union, comes down to that issue.
Hey Europe, stay out of our area, you're pathetic. Henry Clay just announced a dank...
So he glosses over that real quick, but the Monroe Doctrine's a big deal. It's basically James Monroe and all of the presidents who will come after him saying that Europe needs to stay the heck out of affairs in North and South America. They shouldn't interfere with the political issues that are going on, or the wars, or any of those sorts of things. And that lasts for quite a while. And likewise, then, the U.S. government, for the most part, stays out of what's going on in Europe. And that'll last all the way up until our involvement in the First World War.
New system. We'll be good if the South didn't hate it. John C. Calhoun's evading taxes again. I want to remove the natives. You can't. Why? Because we said so. Okay. And he removed the natives. Check.
Specifically, Andrew Jackson. So what happened is that he wants to remove the Native American population to west of the Mississippi, to reservations in places like modern-day Oklahoma. And he has to go to court to do it, and the Supreme Court sides with the Cherokee Nation down in northern Georgia, eastern Tennessee, western North Carolina. And then Andrew Jackson basically just says, meh, does it anyway. He says, they made their ruling, now let's see them enforce it. And he completely just disregards the Supreme Court's decision.
Check out the Whigs versus the donkeys. Industry is fire right now, but factory working is horrible. Let's just stop working. Let's go west cause we're American. They go west, kicking the natives in Mexico in the process. A lot of Irish people just died, so everybody starts immigrating to the country. This sucks, said the Know Nothing Party, knowing nothing on foreign influence.
So we've talked about this one before too, with the Irish potato famine. A big chunk of Irish immigration happens at this time as people are fleeing, trying to find somewhere where they can just get food. And start over again. And a lot of people who have Irish roots in this country can trace those roots back to the 1840s, 1850s. Even then, you have, if you think it's something new that people are like against immigration in the modern day here in America, it's nothing new. It's just the groups that they're opposed to immigration, or in particular illegal immigration today. But there's always been opposition to certain immigration groups. Big opposition to Irish immigration, Catholics specifically. There's opposition to Chinese immigration happening in the West later on. This is all stuff that's gone on. There's nothing new under the sun, it's been said, right? So all the political issues we're dealing with today are just rehashing of issues that have existed since the beginning of time.
We got more land, but how do we use it? Okay, that new land from Mexico? No slaves here. You can make a political party out of this. It didn't work, but it did piss off the South. Don't worry, I got this, said Henry Clay again, adding California after our gold thing happened there. It didn't go well. Frick it, let's let the people decide. Never mind. The woman...
Yeah, terrible idea. The idea of popular sovereignty. Rather than saying, okay, everything north of this line is going to be free, everything south of this line is going to be slave, let's just let Kansas decide for itself. So what's happening? All the pro-slavery people start moving into Kansas so they can win the vote for the pro-slavery side. All the anti-slavery people do the same, and of course eventually it comes to blows, and that's where you're going to see what's called Bloody Kansas. And it becomes kind of a preview of the American Civil War that's going to happen very soon after.
Just had a pretty cool meetup advocating better rights, introducing the elephants as if donkeys weren't enough. Hey, excuse me, I'm in the north and my master died. Can I be free and be like a citizen? No, cause you're black. The nation.
Yeah, Dred Scott decision. It effectively states that the black people can't be citizens, and that's going to remain the fact of the matter until 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments get passed, which grant citizenship and protection to former slaves at that point. At this point, we're basically building up to the Civil War. The Republican Party forms in the 1850s out of what's left of the Whig Party and some others. They run their first official candidate for president in 1856. It's John C. Fremont. He loses. But then in 1860, you get this perfect storm of events where the Democrats can't agree on a candidate. You get another candidate running for, I think it's Constitutional Union Party. So you basically have a four-way race with two Democrats, Constitutional Union, and a Republican, which ends up being Abraham Lincoln and Lincoln wasn't even supposed to be the nominee. There were like four other guys who thought they were going to be the nominee going in. Lincoln wasn't anybody's first choice, but he was basically everybody's second choice. And when they couldn't agree on a first choice, they all go to their default second candidate, and that's Abraham Lincoln.
Nation started falling apart. After all, the last several presidents didn't really even do anything.
Nope.
Guys, I'm Lincoln, and slavery is disgusting. I'm running for president, by the way. By the way, he won. Wait, guys, I won't take away your slaves. Just chill for a bit. Yeah! Nah.
So, Lincoln, his official policy was he was against expansion of slavery, but if you're a slave owner in the South, ending expansion is the beginning of the end, because eventually, everybody knows there's going to be further expansion of the United States. There's manifest destiny, there's growth, there's all these new territories out west that are eventually going to become states. If they're all going to join, if the party in power is saying no more expansion of slavery, then that means all these new states are going to be free states. Eventually, that means less and less influence for the slave states. And eventually, the North is going to have so much power, and the free states are going to have so much power that they can just eliminate slavery whenever they want to. That's how the South sees this. So to them, electing a president who is opposed to expansion is basically electing a president who wants to end slavery, even though that's not really what he said.
The country's fighting itself. Guys, we need to fight like a snake right now. I'm gonna free the slaves. Except it didn't really do anything, but it did change the idea. Now we're...
Excellent point. Legally, I mean, I wouldn't say it didn't do anything, because it definitely freed a lot of slaves. It frees the slaves in the areas of the South which are then in control of the Confederate States of America, who are in rebellion. It doesn't free the slaves in places like Kentucky, Missouri, Delaware, Maryland, states who are still loyal to the Union, or in places like New Orleans, for example, which are under the control of the Union, though there were ways around that. All you had to do was say you weren't from New Orleans. I came here from the middle of Mississippi, which is under control of the Confederates. Okay, you're free. They were all too happy to look the other way on that stuff. But, the big factor with the Emancipation Proclamation is it changes what the war is about. It becomes about slavery. And this didn't go off without a hitch. There were a lot of Union soldiers who did not sign up for that. They signed up to preserve the Union. And when the war goals changed, a lot of them were against that. A lot of Southern Illinois soldiers, for example, were ready to up and mutiny over this. And it took guys like John Logan, who was very eloquent, kind of talking them down from the ledge, so to speak. But eventually it does change the aim of the war, and now it is about making it truly one country where there is no slavery, and that's going to become the post-war goal.
We're destroying slavery. Yo, but we're still fighting pretty good. Not anymore. The North just set the South on fire, and they eventually died. Hey, nice, we won. Lincoln's actually chilling now. And he gets assassinated. Great, now we gotta rebuild everything. The South kind of still did slavery and pretended the war never happened.
Absolutely true. Basically, to sum it up, slavery comes right back in all but name. Even though you have the 13th Amendment passed, which says that slavery can't exist, basically the local laws get put in place as such that in the South, for example, they would make all these former slaves who didn't really have the means to move to the North or to go out on their own. It was supposed to happen that way. There had been promises made that they were going to get 40 acres and a mule, for example. And this is one of the main arguments for reparations today, is the idea that they were never given what they were promised, which is true. But and a lot of that I lay at the feet of Andrew Johnson, who was a Southerner, was kind of pro-slavery, and kind of walks back a lot of those promises. But so a lot of these former slaves end up going back to work for their former masters, and they're forced to sign contracts which basically make them slave in all but name. They couldn't leave. They were obligated to stay and work, and they would work for room and board and for no pay. So basically they ended up being slaves again.
The whites wanted to stay the best race, so they start using violence. And now the US was looking beautiful on the outside, but disgusting in the inside. Businesses became bigger, but the working conditions became badder. This sucks, said the Knights of Labor. Yeah, we're only taking skilled workers, bro. Hey farmers, do you hate railroads and mechanized farming? Introducing the Grangers, now the Populists. The South was getting more industrialized, but now more racist. No, trust me, it's separate but equal.
So talking about Plessy versus Ferguson there. Plessy versus Ferguson is the Supreme Court case that will basically define the next 70 years or so. Well, 60 years. Separate but equal, they call it, which is basically you can't discriminate by saying that black people can't eat in your restaurant, but you can force them to sit in a coloreds only section in the back of the restaurant. You know, you can't force black people to not be able to ride your bus, but you can make them ride in the back of the bus. You can make them use separate restrooms. You can make them have their own schools where they don't integrate with whites. And that'll get rolled back finally, in part by Brown versus Board of Education in the 1950s in Topeka, Kansas, which rules that the U.S. public education system, for example, can't have separate but equal because separate is inherently unequal. And then eventually it'll all get rolled back.
I'm gonna buy everybody. Wait, why don't we donate all our money for society? Sweetie, let's focus on the cities, which are...
So, yeah, all of these kind of robber barons, as they get known as, these first kind of mega wealthy guys like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, they accumulate all this wealth and they're demonized in the press as these terrible, evil people. And so to counter that, once they accumulate all this wealth, they become these huge philanthropists who turn around and try to give all that wealth away. And so that's why you see all kinds of things with the names like Rockefeller and Carnegie all over them, because these were their attempts to give back after they'd accumulated more wealth than they could ever spend in their whole lives.
Are garbage right now. Introducing the progressives. Let's fix that crap. Oh shoot, we just ran out of land. That's some good grub right there. But Spain controls...
And you know, that wasn't the first attempt to do that. Under Grant's administration in the 1870s, he tried really, really hard to acquire the Dominican Republic. He had an agreement in place with the Dominican Republic for the U.S. to acquire that territory, but he couldn't get Congress on board with it. So that was really kind of one of the first big attempts to expand beyond the continental United States after Alaska. Well, that's still continental United States. Yeah, Cuba, this is going to become kind of the flashpoint for the Spanish-American War, which is kind of built, like a lot of wars, on false pretenses. The idea that the USS Maine explodes. And this is where you have the press really kind of complicit in leading the U.S. populace toward war with Spain, because they print these sensational stories about how the Spanish are responsible for the Maine blowing up when it probably didn't happen that way.
Cuba.
Yep, there's your articles.
Sunk our ship? Bro, we didn't even do anything. Now we got that grub, including the Philippines? This is lit, said William McKinley, getting assassinated. And they lose Cuba. The United States becomes a world power.
Yeah, and you can thank Theodore Roosevelt for a lot of that with the U.S. becoming a world power. McKinley and Roosevelt, kind of imperialist ideas. We acquire, Hawaii. We acquire Puerto Rico. We acquire a naval base in Cuba. We acquire the Philippines. But now, because you've got these far-off places, you need a navy. And it's really kind of under Theodore Roosevelt that the U.S. Navy starts to ramp up. It's not just the U.S. This is a time when naval power... The British have always been a major naval power. But now countries like Germany are going to start ramping up their navy. But this is where the U.S. starts to really exert its influence on the world stage.
While doing some other stuff too. Sherman's vice president, not William Sherman, this a different Sherman, under the new president, William Sherman Taft. While Europe's killing themselves in this war, the US was actually chilling. Germany just ruined it. I'm gonna show you what democracy feels like.
Yeah, I'm gonna show you what democracy feels like. Yeah, Woodrow Wilson, for all his faults, and there were many, it's well known how much I hate Woodrow Wilson on this channel. The idea of letting people decide for themselves is a good one, right? And his idea here is that Germany and all these countries, a lot of them are monarchies, and so the people aren't deciding for themselves. And so he wants to basically force democracy on the world. And let's face it, some countries just aren't ready for that.
Wait, we already did this scene. After the war, Germany was the dunce forced to pay a lot of money. Check out the League of Nations. Can you guys join it, please? No. Whoops, a disease just killed everybody. Russia.
Didn't kill everybody. Killed about 5% of the world's population, which probably felt like everybody. It was certainly a big, big deal. I mean, as bad as COVID is, we're nowhere near that percentage. You have to think, let's do a little math here. We're going to, I think, hit 8 billion people in population this year in the world. So let's imagine for a second that 5% of the world's population dies today. We're talking about, 400 million people? That's what the Spanish flu did, which didn't originate in Spain, probably originated in North America.
Russia just became the Soviet Union, and it scared the crap out of everybody. Alcohol just got banned. That's kind of sick. And women got the right to vote. Finally. Hey blacks, tired of the South? Move to the North and share that epic culture. The 1920s, we're now in cars watching movies and breaking it down. And this stock thing's gonna do good. Just kidding.
Great point about culture. The 1920s is really the time when black culture begins to influence in significant ways jazz music, but not just jazz music, other forms of music as well. In the 1950s, a lot of what drove rock and roll, it comes from black culture. I mean, Elvis Presley is not possible without having grown up in the South and been around the black culture. That sound came from these people. And so for the first time, they're having influence, although people probably wouldn't have given them a lot of credit for that.
Hoover tried doing something but failed. Then FDR comes in with the New Deal and it actually worked, but it failed. Yo, Germany's going wild. Italy's going wild. And Japan? Guys, we should team up and take over the entire world. Damn it, I gotta run for a third term. The US did their same brilliant move and was actually just chilling. Japan wanted more land, but they were scared of the US, so Japan spits on them.
It's more complicated than that. Japan wants more land. They start taking all this land, but they need oil in order to keep the land and to keep expanding, because oil drives ships, it drives tanks, it drives planes. And you need oil, and Japan's getting a lot of its oil from the US, but the US is saying, you're not getting our oil anymore if you don't stop with this expansion. You've got to chill. And Japan didn't want to do that, and so they launched this preemptive strike on Pearl Harbor because they know they can't win a protracted, long war with the U.S., so they've got to win a quick, decisive victory, force the U.S. to settle for peace, and of course none of that happens.
They declare war, and the others declare war on the U.S.
Which baffles
that's what
me.
Friends do.
So stupid.
The U.S. is making a big fat bomb, like a really big one. We gotta take down Germany, man. They're freaking crazy. So they take down Germany. Then the U.S. starts taking down Japan. Roosevelt died and Harry Truman carries on the presidency. Mr. President, we can't invade the mainland. Our soldiers will die. Bro, let's just use the bomb. So they drop it on Japan. Twice.
Of course, those images he's showing, those are probably hydrogen bombs, which are so much more massive than the bombs that are dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In fact, let's look at some numbers because it'll blow your mind. So it's generally understood that the largest bomb that's ever been tested was the Tsar Bomba, which just was, I mean, we can't even begin to wrap our mind around how enormous this thing was. But the Tsar Bomba, which was detonated by the Soviets, was the equivalent of 1,570 times the combined energy of both bombs, the ones that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was 10 times the combined energy of all conventional explosives used in all of World War II, and 1/4 of the estimated yield of the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa, and 10% of the combined yield of all nuclear tests to date. This thing was huge. I mean, I think I remember reading somewhere that it was detonated like 3 miles up in the air or something. It weighed 60,000 pounds. It was between 50 and 58 megatons. But I remember reading somewhere about what it did. It was visible at a distance of more than 600 miles away. The mushroom cloud went 42 miles in the air. The blast wave circled the globe 3 times. The sound wave shattered windows almost 500 miles away on Dixon Island. I mean, wow. Just wow.
The war ended after that. Goodbye, League of Nations. Hello, United Nations. But we got a problem. These two don't even like each other. They start another war, now with nuclear bombs. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't do that, but I still hate you. It's alliance time, baby. Now with other countries to back us up. Also, Germany's in shambles. It's like the hotspot. There's some other wars going on and stuff. Back them up!
So, the Cold War is basically, it ends up being hot wars in several places, but through proxies. And so Korea, for example, North Korea is supported by Communist China. It's supported by the Soviet Union. South Korea is supported by the United Nations. Vietnam, same thing. It's a proxy war between communism and democracy. Afghanistan's going to become one of those proxy wars. It's going to happen in Africa and Central America, all these different places where we're not fighting directly, but we're fighting through other people.
Look, it's communism, and it scared the crap out of everybody. The two superpowers wanted to be better than the other in weapons, wars, allies, and now in space. The Soviet Union just put a thing in space. Oh, heck nah! Then the US creates NASA. America is booming, like the population. Everyone's got television, and fast food becomes a revelation. Like, we're talking about the first McDonald's here. Wait, Cuba's communist? This results in...
So if you haven't seen the movie about how McDonald's got started, it's kind of cool. It wasn't really McDonald's we know today was started by a guy named Ray Kroc, who bought McDonald's from the McDonald brothers but kept the name. So I mean, their name exists to this day, but they weren't really responsible for McDonald's as we know it.
The end of the world, almost. Screw this, said Kennedy. We're going to the moon. And he gets assassinated.
Honestly, one of my favorite moments in all of presidential history is that speech that President Kennedy gives. I think it's at Rice University down in Texas, where he lays out this challenge to go to the moon by the end of the decade, to put a man safely on the moon and return him safely to Earth. And he says, we choose to go to the moon and do these other things by the end of this decade, not because they're easy, but because they are hard. I miss that about our leaders, setting these bold, ambitious, seemingly impossible ideas before the American people, and then putting the incredible resources of the United States behind making it happen. We should do something like that with Mars. We should do something like that with cancer. Unfortunately, now everything's so politicized that if a Democrat proposed an idea like that, everybody on the Republican side would immediately find reasons to oppose it. And if a Republican did it, all the Democrats would find a reason to oppose it, even if it was a good idea. Unfortunately, I just don't know if we live in a world where that kind of thing's even possible anymore.
Racism is bad. Civil rights time. Buses, education, marches. Oh shoot, Luther King, man? He's standing for equality to fight racism, and the US agrees. Dude, I saw him, man. Why is everything sexy? Lyndon wants to take Vietnam to the next level, so he sends a lot of troops. The US slapped the Soviets in their face and landed the first dudes on the moon, introducing Richard Nixon, and he's done with Vietnam because it's a disaster. There goes Watergate ruining Nixon's career. Now nobody trusts the government. Iran just had a revolution.
Not sure if that's the moment that everybody started distrusting the government, but it certainly didn't help things.
Kidnapping multiple Americans because Jimmy Carter and their king were best friends. It's Reagan time. Technology is getting better too and the world's more connected. Oh my god, bro, it's computers. You can check emails and play games on it. I'ma make things more free to you guys. This makes the Soviet Union collapse. But hey, at least Germany's back together. Companies start becoming bigger and bigger. Thanks, Bill. Some buildings just got bombed. Happy New Year. Then obliterated. Then a war starts over that.
Yeah, people forget that the Twin Towers got bombed. There was a bomb down in the parking deck down below the Twin Towers. It's kind of a preview of what's to come. It's something that kind of doesn't really get thought about too much today.
Surprise, everyone's got a cell phone now. There's the Earth where I was actually born. It's on fire, and the economy crashed again. Surprise, Obama. And now, Obamacare. It's like healthcare, but from Obama. Now you can talk to people online. On your phone. Now you can order stuff online. On your phone. Everything just got shut down. And it just got political. And canceled on Twitter. Then we buy the universe. Or maybe go extinct. I don't know.
Alright, so, interesting. I try not to be critical of the videos that I react to on YouTube because I want to be supportive of those channels since I'm using their content to have a deeper discussion and go a little more in depth on these topics. It does feel like a cheap imitation of Bill Wirtz a little bit, but I give the guy credit for trying. So I'm not going to be too critical of that. So good for him for attempting to do something. And obviously there's a ton of work that has gone into this. So check him out. There's a link in the description that'll take you to that original content. As I mentioned before, a couple of links to some other videos to go into a deeper dive on some of these topics that we covered in this. Let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.